meant so much to you when you were growing up? You know, I can identify a whole lot with what Paul had said, or Timothy, with his mother and his grandmother. My prayers, most of the time, I'm thanking God for Sally's parents and for my parents. Well, they helped us to be able to be Christians. If it wasn't for my mother and grandmother, I don't know what would have happened, because my dad's side of the family was pretty rough. So I'm thankful for them. And I'm thankful for the lessons I learned in being able to spend some time with my granny, we called her. When I was a little kid, maybe about 10, 11, sometimes I'd go up and stay with her at Elmore City, Oklahoma. And I remember one time we were taking a bus from Snyder, Texas, and had to go up to Amarillo and then cut across and go to Oklahoma City, and then come back down, have one of her boys, my uncles, bring us back to Elmore City. And at one place we stopped, the bus stopped there. Do y'all remember some of they were kind of, what could I say? They would have the food, they'd have plates of food. You remember some of that? And you'd put your money in and you'd get a plate of whatever you wanted. I've never seen any of those anymore. But I remember we stopped there at that bus stop, and Granny went over and got one plate and took it over to a little table, and we sat there, and there were different people around there, and we put that plate out, and we would share that plate. And I was kind of embarrassed, because people would look over and think, they're poor. They don't have much. And they had to just get one plate. And we sat down there, and she had that ready for us to eat. And she said, Billy, would you give thanks? I was embarrassed. But all of a sudden, I felt like this is the thing to do. And you know, I carry that on, and I think of Paul saying, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. My little old granny was not ashamed of the gospel. And I have good memories of being able to, in Elmore City, walking from the house where she lived, taking care of her daddy, my great-granddaddy, and walking along a dusty road to the little old church building. I'm thankful for people in my life that have helped me to recognize some things about Christ and about being a Christian. We need to look for examples. Paul had said, Peter, in 1 Peter, the 2nd chapter, verse 21 and 22, he says, for the time you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth. Our big example is Jesus. But you know, sometimes we need to be able to see people that we can follow as they follow Jesus, and looking right on down the way. And Paul said in 1 Corinthians 11, verse 1, he said, imitate me just as I also imitate Christ. I think of several people, but I've been thinking lately of one man that I think influenced me as much as anybody else, Reuben Stanley. He was a preacher. His brothers were preachers. His daddy was a farmer, but a preacher. Now, I'll tell you what Reuben told us. He said when they'd go in, get ready to eat, the plates were turned upside down. And after they had offered thanks, before they could get a meal, before they could turn the plate over, they had to quote a scripture. Someone said, well, Jesus wept. He said, "Now get you one meal. It's got to be more." And he said that each one of those boys would quote a scripture, and then they could turn their plate, and his daddy would quote the scripture right before and right after that. Now, is that not some knowledge? And that's the way they grew up. Reuben was kind of an all-around, all-purpose guy. He knew electronics, he could build things, but he knew the Bible. He served well as an elder. And I thought he was a great preacher. And I looked up to Reuben. Can you think of people you've looked up to? We need to be looking for examples that help to lead us to a better understanding as being a Christian and Christ. You know, Paul had said, again, writing to the Corinthians, he said, "Be not deceived. Evil companions corrupt good morals." Oh, how that's true. Alistair, with this morning, when you spoke about how someone has temptations and if someone has a problem with alcohol, you don't go to the bars, do you, Alistair? You want to stay away from these things. We need to be watching the people that we associate with. Who do we associate with? What are they leading us to do? Well, how about looking to those people that are faithful in the Lord's work and look to them for examples? And how about us being examples? In 1 Timothy, the 4th chapter, and verse 12, Paul said, "Let no one despise your youth, but be an example." We got a bunch of young people over here. We got some guys sitting over here, and I hope they're paying attention and not making notes or looking at the little phones like some were doing this morning, boys. But you've got a responsibility, if we serve Christ, being an example. Setting the example. Showing others how to follow Jesus. Showing others how to worship in a meaningful way. You know, there was an old black preacher, Marshall Keeble. Some of you have heard of him. One of the ideas that he gave was that you're no more a Christian if you're sitting in the pew than you are a chicken if you stay in a chicken house. Someone can say, "Oh, wow." And someone, Randy, you'd said something this morning. I mean, it gave me that the way we're living today. Look at the woke generation. Look at the things that are taught. Where Sebastian, some could say that Miranda's not the only one that can have a baby. Isn't that stupid? Be careful who we associate with. Be careful the things that we watch. Right along with what Alistair was saying this morning. Well, our environment can shape us, can mold us, and it can be in the wrong way. So as well as following examples, finding people that we can look up to, and finding people and looking at people that can lead us toward Jesus, let's also be concerned with setting an example. In 1 Peter 5, verses 2 and 3, Peter said, he's speaking to elders. He says, shepherd the flock of God which is among you, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly, nor as being lord over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. You know, one of the things that we want to do here, and BC and I have talked about this, and probably others of you with him, the preacher over Mission said, you know, we're missing out, we're lacking. Because we start talking about sending young men to preacher training school. No, this ought to be going on now. We ought to be helping others to begin to learn and to set the example and to learn to teach and to preach. And I believe this with the men and women. We have so many women who are good teachers and can work with these areas where they can be and learn to be able to present and know how to teach. Didn't you have to do that? Have to learn that when you go in and when you start learning to teach? You know, when BC had said that you put Hugo and myself saying, look at the qualifications. Could they serve as shepherds? Could they serve as elders? I graded myself. My wife, my children got an A+. Everything else is an I, incomplete, in progress. Because I'm lacking in so many things and wanting to grow. Setting an example. What do we take from this? I hope something. First of all, look for examples to follow that will strengthen you and help you to live for Christ. And you know, for young people, I don't have to be young, people that plan to marry. One of the things that I got on some handouts that I had when I do premarital counseling and marriage counseling, one of them for the man and for the woman, is your husband a better Christian because of you? Is your wife a better Christian because of you? We need to look, young people, if you're not there yet, for others who would also be seeking Christ so that you can be equally yoked and moving in the same direction to get to heaven. Look for examples. The second thing to take away, I hope, is set the example. Set the example that others can look to you and say, you know, I want to be the type of young man that Joshua is. I want to be faithful like he is. I'm glad y'all are here. Thank you. Would you pray with me? Our Father in heaven,